The comments, opinions, and views shared during this program are of those individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, concordant body, appendant body, Masonic Authority, or craftsmanonline.com. Welcome to the Craftsman Online Podcast, the only 5-star rated Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York.
Welcome back to the Craftsman Online Podcast, now proudly sponsored by BricksMasons.com. Visit BricksMasons.com and explore their extensive catalog and elevate your Mason experience with style and substance. Plus, our podcast listeners use the promo code CRAFTSMAN at checkout to enjoy free shipping on your first order from BricksMasons.com. You've joined us for an episode on defending Freemasonry, as Freemasons sometimes feel we are constantly doing that, and maybe this is just something new that we face, and we'll find out with the help of our guests that it is not something. It's been going on since the beginning of time, so to speak, as we bring back one of our favorite guests, Dr. Jason Williams. He's a board-certified psychiatrist and author of Brought to Light, The Mysterious George Washington Masonic Cave. Welcome back, Dr. Jason.
Michael, very good to be here. It's always a pleasure.
We should also add to your bio, board-certified psychiatrist, author of the George Washington Cave, and keynote speaker for festive boards and table lodges in the Virginia, D.C. area.
Yep, and hopefully more presentations and more engagements to come. That's my hope.
Yeah, and we joke, I said it again, Dr. Jason, not yet a brother, was a guest at my home lodge here in D.C., St. John's number 11. We had our table lodge back in the summertime and in July, and Dr. Jason came and gave a great talk about Freemasonry, tied in some George Washington history, but also left behind a copy of the book that we'll be talking about and sharing some excerpts with you. It's the Essays on the Mysteries and the True Object of the Brotherhood of Freemasons. This is the 3rd edition, which, as the note on the cover says, considerably expanded and corrected from the original in 1776. Give us a little background on this and, of course, your introduction and how this was all translated into English before we dive into the content of it.
Fortunately, this is a much thinner text than my cave book, but it's a little convoluted of a story, the actual text itself. As I was doing my research for my book on the George Washington Masonic Cave, run into another podcast called From the Quarries. Do you know that podcast by any chance?
I don't. I'm going to add that to my list, though.
You know, I'm not a Mason, and it's on my list, right? And I don't think they have that many subscribers or viewers, but it's on YouTube. And that's how this text came to my attention. Just the title of this book and this, caught my eye, the essay on the mysteries. Oh, I love a mystery, right? And that's really when I decided to do a deep dive in this particular text and refine it, improve it into modern English. First edition came out in 1771. There are no known copies around. And so, but this one, the 3rd edition, claimed to be considerably expanded and corrected. And so I'm like, maybe this is something that really should be, hate to use the title of my book, but brought to light. Plug there for the book. So that's how I kind of got involved with this book.
I got to ask you about the translation part, because we see this when it comes a lot to the more ancient languages, when they try to translate like from Greek to English, or, some things can get lost in the meanings. Did you use, obviously you had a French speaking person, but were they a Freemason so that when they were reading some of the original text, they would kind of have a deeper understanding of maybe the codes or the words or the phrases that were used and give them a better representation in English?
Maybe that's where we should go next with this. An English guy came by and published the first English edition in 1862. And his name was William Henry Reese. He was a Freemason. And he's a long forgotten English gentleman. He's not historically really relevant, but according to him, this is what he put in his preface, his introduction to it. He came across it in a used bookstore. What's interesting, though, Michael, is he didn't publish it using a Masonic press. Rather, he went to one of the largest generalist publishers in England at the time, called Simpkin and Marshall. They also happened to be sort of the Barnes and Noble. They were the largest wholesaler, maybe not Barnes and Noble, but the largest wholesaler of books in all the United Kingdom as well. So that he really wanted this book to get out there. the purpose of the book isn't to reveal any to the uninitiated, any secrets or handshakes that's not the point. The point is to really get at and show the profane or the uninitiated the true motives of Freemasonry, like what drives it, what's the purpose. You're right, he comes to defend it. Part of my project was to translate the third edition, the one that I found in Rome in the library, but also bring it into a more modern English and French. So my book has English in the front and then also a French version in the back. So French readers can also have a more modern take on this document that originally was written in 1771, but not published until 1774.
I love how there's a story behind the story of this. That's what you kind of eloquently kind of wrap up or summarize in the introduction to the book, which is kind of funny because I recall, at the bar during the social hour talking with you about some of the themes that are in the essays of the mysteries and the true object of the Brotherhood of Freemasons. And you and I were having conversations, and there was this kind of coy smile on your face because little did I know there was a copy of this book for me and every other guest at the festive board, and you had kind of done your research, and you were brothers will know I was being tested, I was being challenged, I was being tried, and how would I react to these? So when we talk about the essay itself, I want to get your take on this because I look at it as kind of a mix of like a position paper, as I say, like defending Freemasonry, kind of meets a love letter. It seems like the author of this essay had a disagreement or was challenged as to why they're a Freemason. And to the person they're writing to, it's not like just some friend or acquaintance. It's like a family member or a really close loved one. Did you get that vibe as well?
I didn't get that vibe, actually. And one major thing that shouldn't be overlooked is that in the original publication, or at least in the second edition, both in French and in English, it's written to a male. The reader is a man. And in this revised third edition, it's clearly written to a woman or a madame. And the terms used are more formal, and it's written in a very formal language in French as well. It's written from the heart, that's for sure. But I wouldn't say it's on very colloquial or warm terms. Like it sounds like to really impress on this person the motives of Freemasonry. And in fact, in the very beginning of this letter, and that's what it is. This is a letter that was written, an anonymous letter. We don't know who wrote it, and we don't know who received it. It starts off, it's clearly a response letter. He starts off by saying, no, you wrongly describe Freemasonry with the term sect. What I didn't get was a sense that it was pressuring this person to convert or to join the craft. It was not that. This was a heartfelt, let me explain from the heart, what is Freemasonry, what are the motives, and how are we not one of those sects, and how are we not pernicious community, as he describes some other organizations.
I felt it towards the end, like when he was trying to I think most of us that have had any kind of conversation about somebody that has a difference, you've realized that you don't have the power to change people's minds. So you're just trying to convince them or see some good side of this or just validate and maybe at some point we can meet somewhere close in the middle on this, and kind of trying to leave that door open. And I was like, wow, I really would have loved to known who the person was that triggered this man to write this letter.
I brought up in my introduction that there's also the possibility that it was not a genuine letter. That is to say, it was more of a literary device. Instead of just being an academic, treatise on Freemasonry, maybe some clever person thought, you know what, I'm going to write it as a letter, and I'm going to, I'm not going to date it or sign it, and that might be a way to really get more people allured. I think even the title is almost alluring, the mysteries and the true object of the Brotherhood of Freemasons. It's almost like I want to read that, right?
I wanted to get to one of the first points where the writer of this essay says, quote, "We must not judge the Society of Freemasons solely based on its mysteries, jargon, customs, or emblems." Now, I found that particular line interesting because going back to the date of this, that would have been written near the time of when the Bavarian Illuminati had kind of made its way into Freemasonry and had their moment in history during the publication of the letter. Was there anything that you spotted that was going on in the world and history at that point that would have compelled the writer to make that statement?
Let's put it into a little bit of a historical context, right? So if it was written in like 1771, and published a few years after that, shortly before the American Revolutionary War. But over in Europe, the 18th century was a very tumultuous period. And there was a lot of political and social upheaval in different corners of Europe. There were various secret societies, and it was kind of risky, especially in some parts of Europe, to be a member of of one of those societies, including Freemasonry. The two main powers at the time were the church, the Catholic Church, and the monarchy. They oftentimes saw, especially Masonry, as threatening to their authority. It kind of came down to power in a sense. The Enlightenment ideals that these men were starting to discuss in lodges about equality and freedom, was kind of intimidating to them. The Pope at the time, Pope Clement the 12th, issued a papal bull, which is an edict, right? And it basically labeled Freemasonry as, quote, depraved and perverted, end quote. Right? You can't get stronger in language. And it also banned Catholics from joining. And my understanding is that ban is still in place. There are Catholics who join lodges, but they're not supposed to. That bull triggered a decades-long wave, or a centuries-long wave of anti-Masonic persecution in Europe. And that, of course, spread to other parts of the world as well. In France, it was a little bit different. The Pope's bull never was registered by the Parliament of France. It never got approved, so it never legally took effect in France. One quote, I love this quote in the book, right, from this letter in 1771, talking about all the jargons and the symbols. And it says, "The fool is dazzled by them. The prying, inquisitive man gets lost and is left confused. But with an internal satisfaction, the philosopher finds his principles and ideas there." And that is, for some people, they are going to take these symbols and run with them to all kinds of, conspiracy theories and outrageous ideas. And others are going to just be like, it's just overwhelming. It's too much. I just want to I don't want all that. And then others can find deep meaning in them. And what the author of the letter says is that, humans are logical, but more than anything, humans, are imaginative creatures. And they don't want to be bored with something that lacks charm and something that's dull. And all of the mystique and the symbols and all of that, just makes it so much more vivid. It impresses more on the human psyche and memory. It's just so much more than just reading a dry history book or something like that.
Hey, it's Brother Michael Arce for BricksMasons.com. Our podcast is now sponsored by Bricks Masons. It's become our favorite destination for all of your Masonic needs, whether it's Masonic apparel for yourself or a unique gift idea for a brother. BricksMasons.com is your online marketplace where tradition meets innovation. We all know when it comes to lodge meetings, dark suit and tie. That's pretty much our standard dress code. And it's tough, very tough to find black neckties these days. Trust me, I went to 3 different stores in the mall and ended up having to go shopping online. And that's where I discovered this nice, unique Master Mason's Blue Lodge necktie. Don't worry, I'm going to leave the link for you to check this out on your end and the notes for this episode. But it is that solid black with just a little bit of a hint of the square and compass. It's got that cool black yarn, so it has a 3D. You look at it, it's kind of a hidden look to it, and it adds just enough pop to your outfit when you're in lodge. Plus, the best part is $33.99. You can't beat that. Throw it in the shopping cart and take it with you. Visit BricksMasons.com, explore their extensive catalog, and elevate your Masonic experience with style and substance. Plus, our Craftsman Online podcast listeners use the promo code CRAFTSMAN at checkout to enjoy free shipping on your first order at BricksMasons.com. Another quote that I really like from the book, and it puts Masonry in a positive light, of course. The author says, "We must regard Freemasons as a society of symbolic philosophers. And I highlighted that and wrote a note to myself that is the best quote that really hits Freemasonry. Like, Freemasonry is that place where you have many men from many different walks of life that all come together and they share that knowledge. And it's not to get super Masonic about it, but if you picture a brick wall that would go around a house, there's the little nooks and crannies in Freemasonry, that brotherly love, that cement is what's kind of filling in those gaps, and that we're all seeing that we have those parts of us as well. We might consider ourselves well-rounded. We have those little things that are missing, and now we have other people that are coming into our life and sharing and enlightening us. So that I really thought was like, man, instead of talking about like truth seekers, maybe we should be using that term, like we're basically modern philosophers.
Yes, and he uses that term philosophy or philosophers multiple times throughout this text. It gets back to the very beginning of the text where he's saying, no, this is not a sect. This is not a religious, organization or a church, that it's more of like a philosophy group. It very close to the quote that you like at the end of that paragraph is my favorite quote from this whole letter. And it says, the whole secret of the Freemasons consists of teaching by its symbols that the true science is morality and that the happiness of man is found in virtue alone. And that made me stop to think, the true science is morality. Like, there's science and then there's true science. Freemasonry was, of course, a big part of the Enlightenment, which I believe we're still in. A lot of people say, oh, Enlightenment was back in the 1700s. And no, I think we're still in the Enlightenment, in fact, right? Our founding fathers' documents are Enlightenment documents, and we still operate under them. So we still live in the Enlightenment period, in my opinion. It's more than just the science. You have to incorporate moral principles with the scientific knowledge and advancements. You need a firm ethical foundation. And I think that's what got me the most out of this letter, is like, that's the secret. It's not just about the science and that there are these moral principles that if we leave those behind as human beings, that we're not really advancing. And that's that's one of the reasons why this book, personally, I kind of wonder sometimes, are we leaving those behind too much? And everybody wants their kids to, do well in science, technology, engineering, and math.
I want to come back to this one because it made me think. I think we got into the papal edict from Pope Clement, and we got into that discussion either around dinner time, maybe just before the festive board started, or maybe it was at the bar during the cocktail hour. But one of the quotes that I lifted from the essay is, quote, they refer to God as the great architect of the universe. And I feel like that is still an issue today, because people outside of Freemasonry, as we refer to them as the profane, and listeners of the podcast know I really don't like that word because it makes it sound like they swear or they're dirty. And I just don't like referring to outsiders like that. But in the Muggle world, I feel like when you hear, and when I first was coming in, I'm like, what are they talking about? The great architect of the universe? Like, what is this? This is where they start to sound like a quote unquote cult. This is different. Why don't they just call it God? And then the explanation is because Freemasonry accepts all faiths and we all believe in one deity or this higher power, a supreme being among all of us, or beings, whatever, faith that you believe in. And we don't want to put one thing above another, so we don't use the word God. We say great architect of the universe.
It's common knowledge. The two things that I don't think you're supposed to talk about in lodges are religion and politics. Am I right there, Michael? Those are the taboo topics.
Yes, but there's a lot of disclaimers on that. But yes,
and I'm wondering, like, when I hear that, I'm like, well, I get on a very practical level, those are the two topics that are frequently get people into arguments and disagreements, and so I can understand that's one reason why those maybe not be the best topics to bring up in lodge, but.
Right. Well, if I could, this might help. The one thing that gets to me is people are like, oh, you guys don't talk about politics or religion. But I can tell you, you'll come into a lodge, and you've been into a table lodge. We open with prayer. There is an altar and an open volume of sacred law, or in some jurisdictions, they'll just say the Holy Bible, or whatever sacred text your lodge wants to have on that altar is there. If I haven't lost you already with religion connections, there's a couple, three big ones right there. Masons are charged to be good citizens. In your first degree, that is one of the things you're told to be as a good citizen. That is a political statement. You're supposed to support the president of the United States or the government and be a good citizen of where you live. That's a political statement. And we say the Pledge of Allegiance in our meetings. Those are all political statements.
Well, and aren't Masons also obligated to respect their religion and to follow their religion's tenets? I'm pretty sure.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. You're told as part of the assurance before you take a degree that there's nothing that's in this degree that's going to conflict with your moral, social beliefs or whatever position you hold in life. Absolutely.
Right. And so what I got out of this letter is that those are two of the key things: is being a good citizen and obeying the government. Not, of course, you know what I mean, but like being a good citizen and not trying to overthrow the government, and being a faithful member of whatever chosen religion. And then let's leave it at that. That's my take of why those are not supposed to be discussed in lodges. Is like, hey, we all agree on that.
So here's a funny, we're not supposed to talk about this in lodge. So yes, we don't talk about politics and religion in lodge, but we did talk about it in this instant. We had a discussion about in the Pledge of Allegiance, it's Pledge Allegiance to the United States of America, one nation under God. There's not supposed to be the comma that when you see it being performed anywhere, people always pause. And there was we had a discussion in lodge with brothers offering their viewpoints as to why that happens. And kind of the consensus is because for those of us that weren't around during pre-Eisenhower time, that phrase didn't exist. One nation under God did not exist in the Pledge of Allegiance. It was inserted as the buildup to the Cold War to show that we were a God-fearing and God-loving nation. Great, good, excellent. However, we as kids from the baby boomers and those other generations were just taught to kind of take that pause, to hold that phrase in reverence, to make it kind of have more meaning, or because the school teacher that was teaching us may have still been used to not having that in the pledge yet. So people were going, oh, I got to remember to put this in. But for whatever reason, we're saying the Pledge of Allegiance incorrectly. And Jason, this was a 15-minute discussion that we had just during one of our business meetings, One Nation Under God. The
culture of Freemasonry in America has been very different than the culture of Freemasonry in France, and remains different. In France, there's a much more profound separation of church and state than we have here. And Freemasonry in France for a long time has tried to ban any religious schools, especially Catholic schools in France. And it's hard to, I haven't met any Freemasons in America who say there shouldn't be any Catholic schools in America. They should all be, just like completely irreligious schools, and that's it. And no one should be, so the culture is different in different places as well.
Actually, an irreligious person, we're going to get to that as the next point here. And this is why I felt like, man, I told my lodge, like, we need to purchase copies of this book from Dr. Jason Williams. And I'm going to leave the link so that you can do that in the notes for this episode. But to give to any interested gentleman or prospect or man who's seeking out Freemasonry, because this line here to me was just beautiful. Quote, if they close the doors to the fools, the wicked, they open them without prejudice to virtuous men. And the reason why I like that is because we talk about who makes up a Freemason or what kind of man is right for Freemasonry. And we're told that the first place that we're made a Mason is in our heart, that just this belief that we want to do this thing. And at some point in our life, that burning in our heart, that passion connects with a thought in our head to like drive us to a door of a lodge and go visit it. And that's kind of how your journey into Freemasonry starts. But the interesting thing is that this is my perspective, is that things are only special to people who see that they are special. To everybody else, you walk by it. This comes from the clothes we wear, to the cars we drive, to the houses we live in, to the partners, the people that we love and marry. Like, that person was special to me. I saw what was unique in them, and that's why. And to me, that's what I feel about Freemasonry, that it's not for every man, just like every man's not right to be a Freemason.
Before getting involved with my research, I probably walked by many Masonic temples in my life and never even really looked at them or to look at the architecture or the symbols on them or anything. But now it's like every time I'm in a new town, I'm always like, oh, I want to just check it out and see what it looks like. And is it still being used? I saw a Masonic lodge in Montana for sale for like $20,000, and that included 5 city lots. This was like just a couple of weeks ago, and I'm like, that's so sad. Like they're like, because it's such a historic building. But you're right. It's not relevant or important until you make it important, and that. Yeah, you're probably right. Freemasonry is probably not for everybody. But here's a bigger question: and this is something that comes up in the book: is Freemasonry for women?
Well, at the time that he was writing this, and in France, they allow co-masonry. To me, that's a whole other episode.
It's a whole other episode, but it comes up in this book.
Yeah,
and there were women Freemason going back a long time. I think the earliest I can't remember. I think it was like 1710 or 1712. Right, was the first woman who was initiated into Freemasonry, right? Not a dependent body, and there still are, women Masonic lodges in France, and it's evolved over the centuries as well. There, it comes up in this book, like definitely, even just that the fact that this letter was perhaps written to a woman is kind of like, wow, because there were, and in the book it just talks a little bit about what the lodges for women were like back then, and how they were, how the degrees were different. Those are some of the things that I ponder about when I give consideration to whether or not I would ever want to join the Freemasons. Things like why are Prince Hall lodges still Prince Hall? Why aren't they unified? Of course, there's history and legacy is the reason why, but why are they still that way? Like, why hasn't somebody said, enough of that already?
That's a perfect place to leave this episode of the Craftsman Online podcast. Big thanks to one of my favorite non-Masonic guests someday, but for now, he's just Dr. Jason Williams, one of my favorite authors and guests. Thanks for coming back on, Dr. Jason.
You're welcome.
His books are Essay on the Mysteries and the True Object of the Brotherhood of Freemasons, the 3rd edition by Dr. Jason Williams, and of course, Brought to Light. Look for the links to get your own copies of these books in the notes for this episode. If you enjoy our podcast and you want to hear some more, you can tell Siri or Alexa to play the Craftsman Online podcast. We're available on all streaming platforms with new episodes every Monday morning. And don't forget to look in the show notes for this episode to start your free 7-day trial of our Patreon membership, where you get early access and an ad-free listening experience, along with some cool bonus content. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.